So welcome to this podcast, and I'd just like to invite this amazing guest, Tabitha Farrar, who is an amazing woman who struggled with anorexia nervosa in the past and has published many books. I wanted to invite her to this podcast because of her book, which I have right now in my hand, The Fear of Weight Gain, where it just goes through the logic of fear, and it was really eye-opening. You could see how many pieces I've highlighted, and it's such a small book, but at the same time it's full of clear knowledge that just because we feel an emotion doesn't mean that it's correct or it's true. Like, we can fear food, but at the same time it serves us. So if you're struggling with the fear of gaining weight, you'd really enjoy this episode, and she'll explain the logic behind why we fear gaining weight and what we can do. And she'll also be talking about what her life looks like now that she's not having severe food anxiety and not being weird, should we say. So I'd like to introduce you to Tabitha Farrar. All right. So essentially, just to get straight to the point, I'd love to just interview you on just talking about your journey, going through anorexia and how to recover in the safest way, because it's very difficult to just have those thoughts, like those conflicting thoughts about, oh, is this the right thing to do? How do I actually listen to what's right? Who do I actually even listen to?
Absolutely.
All right.
I'd say that the point that you made there, Jonathan, saying that it can be really conflicting to know what the right path is, or how to recover, or how to even start. I think that one of the biggest obstacles between even when somebody gets to the point where they know they have an eating disorder and they know they want to recover, they then often have this huge period of procrastination. And procrastination is a fear response. That's what we do when we don't really know what to do and we're afraid of moving forward or afraid of changing. And so that's sort of very natural with eating disorders. And I think that one of the reasons that I was able to recover so robustly and relatively quickly was because it was a while ago when I was in recovery, and it was sort of before the internet was what it is now. I'd be able to say that I just about had a Facebook account when I was in recovery. It was a while ago, and there certainly weren't all of these blogs around, and there just wasn't all of this information being thrown at you all of the time. And if we look at eating disorder recovery now, there's just this plethora of information out there, and it can be overwhelming, and it adds to that procrastination, because when you're afraid of doing something, if you then have all these different opinions as to how you would do it, it's just going to lead to you not doing anything at all. So I think it was easier on me from that perspective. And what that meant, the one thing I did know is I knew that psychotherapy and therapy was not for me. I knew that that was not an approach I was at all interested in. And I don't really know how I knew that then. I just knew it wasn't. And so with that ruled out, and that was the only real approach to eating disorder recovery in any sort of like asking for treatment or asking for help way, with that ruled out, I was just left with basically following my nose, just doing what felt like the right thing to do. And I think that all of us, regardless of how strong our disorder is, regardless of how kind of deranged the thoughts that we have are, I think that there's this part of us deep down that just knows, I just need to eat a lot of food and stop restricting and stop. I need to stop. I need to stop with the compulsive movement. I need to stop with the dietary restriction. And there was this huge part of me that knew deep down, as much as I was terrified of that reality, that I had to stop restricting food, and I had to stop with my crazy exercise schedule. And I just needed to let my body take over. And I needed to let my body guide me, which is terrifying. It's the thing that we're most afraid of when we have an eating disorder, because what our body is saying to us is our body is saying, I'm really hungry. And we know that if we listen to our body, we're going to eat a hell of a lot of food. And that's scary, but it doesn't stop it being true just because it's scary. And so I think that when people are worried, who do I look to? Who do I listen to? What do I read? Which opinion do I take? Just stop all of that and listen to the opinion of your body. The opinion of your body, the bit that scares you, the bit that you don't want to listen to, the bit that you pretend isn't there all the time. Stop pretending it's not there. Listen to it, because that is the voice of truth right there.
Wow, that's really amazing. It's really interesting that you mentioned that psychotherapy and conventional quote unquote therapy wasn't for you, and it seemed like you just wanted to listen to your body during recovery. What was, because it must have been such a strong urge for you to do that. What was that light bulb moment? What was that motivation for you? The fire that actually like lit up to you just jump over the cliff and just do for it, figuratively.
I was just exhausted, Jonathan. I was just really,
Exhausted.
really, really, really tired. And
Mm,
I was just fed up. I was fed up with being me. My life was just not fun. It was
mm,
just the same every day. It was just revolved around my restrictions and my compulsions. And there was nothing in my life other than my eating disorder. And I just was so tired. And I thought, I can't and I won't keep doing this. And I always say that recovery is not about fighting, actually. When you have an eating disorder, when you're actively engaging in an eating disorder, every single day is a fight. Every single day is a battle between you and your body. That is tiring. That is exhausting. What happens when you decide to recover is you just surrender. You just wave the white flag and say, right, that's it. I'm not fighting you anymore. And you just let all the eating happen and you let all the resting happen and you just give in to what your body has been trying to get you to do for ages. And so people always say how difficult recovery is. And I disagree. I think that maintaining an eating disorder is difficult. Recovery,
mm,
you just get to stop. You just get to stop fighting your body. And that actually is a lovely experience. It doesn't have
mm.
to be this horrible, hard thing. Like recovery can just be this place of surrender and, okay, I'm done. I'm not fighting anymore. And most of
Yeah.
us get there when we usually have to get to a point of exhaustion with having an eating disorder to get
Mm.
to that.
Point of exhaustion and surrendering. That's actually really, that's I've never heard anyone like put it that way. And sometimes often people hear about, like, for example, like if with around young kids who have eating disorders, their parents are like, come on, you can do it, come on, just fight harder, just try a little harder. But from your experience, it seems like just give in and listen to your body.
Mm-hmm. And that's
And
actually why a
mm,
lot of people with eating disorders
mm,
sort of see, one of the problems is a lot of people with eating disorders see that as a failure. I'm not going to give in. I'm going to keep fighting. I'm not,
mm.
and I'm like, no, 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 no. Like that's winning. When you actually decide to stop fighting your body, that's winning, because you can try and fight your body for your entire life, but you won't ever win that fight. Your body
Absolutely.
will, biology is always going to win through. You're fighting a losing battle, actually. And
Mm,
sometimes winning is deciding that and saying, no, I'm never going to win this battle, so it's okay to let it go and be happy, which is really what we should all be striving to be, is happy
yeah. At the end of the day,
at the
body
end of the day.
weight or whatever we want, body weight, what we eat, we just need to be happy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And when you were just giving in, if that's the right word, just giving in, listening to your body, um, finally trying to just wave that white flag, were you feeling a little bit of anxiety just because it seems like it has to be a consistent thing to eat
You have
more
to be very
consistently?
consistent. You have to be
Yeah.
consistent in not restricting food and not engaging
Mm,
in any body weight suppression
mm,
activities. And when people have an eating disorder, it's fear of weight gain that drives us to engage in body weight suppression activities. When the brain's afraid of something, the brain motivates us to move away from that thing. And so when the brain has fear of weight gain, the brain motivates us to move away from that fear of weight gain via body weight suppression activities such as exercise and restriction and purging and all the rest of it. And so, of course, when I gave into my body and I started eating, I was terrified of weight gain. Of course, I was afraid of weight gain because I had fear of weight gain. That's what an eating disorder is about, as much as many of us like to deny it. It
mm,
really is about not wanting to gain weight and being afraid of that. But I guess I had decided that whilst I felt afraid of that, I was going to do it anyway. And another part of me knew that the biggest thing that I needed to do to recover was to teach my brain out of that fear of weight gain. And so I saw what I was doing as I have to act in opposition to that fear. I have to teach my brain that I'm not afraid. I have to act as if I'm not afraid. So I'm not saying that I didn't feel anxiety and fear. I absolutely did. But at that point of having an eating disorder, after 12 years of having an eating disorder, I was very used to those feelings. And I had decided to start overriding them and stop responding to them, which was actually a lot easier than I thought it was going to be.
A lot easier.
Yeah.
Can you like explain a bit more about that?
So any emotional response that the brain generates is really a suggestion, and our brains are just like big computers. And now that we actually have computers, I think they can serve as models to better help us understand our brain. Your brain just learns via your actions. And so if your brain suggests an emotional response, say for example you eat some food and then your brain suggests that you should feel guilty after eating, and the brain's suggesting that emotional response because the brain's afraid of weight gain and the brain is trying to discourage you, but using emotions to discourage you from doing things that could lead to weight gain. So it uses a negative emotion after you perform a behavior that it's afraid of to discourage you from continuing to do that. But if we can just see those emotional responses as suggestions from the brain, it's like a pop-up window on your computer that says, do you want to engage in guilt? Yes or no? And you can click no. We don't have to click yes. But as soon as you engage in that guilt and take that suggestion, the brain is suggesting you should feel guilty. And as soon as you jump into that emotion and start to feel guilt and say, yes, I'm feeling guilty, and I agree that I feel guilty by engaging in that emotion, it's almost like you just clicked on the yes button, which then taught that algorithm that yes, guilt is applicable after eating, and the brain will continue to generate guilt after eating. If you can disengage from that emotional response and just reject it and say, thanks, brain, but no, we're not doing this guilt thing anymore after eating, which takes a little bit of self-control the first couple of times. But as soon as you click that no button on that pop-up window, the algorithm's kind of learning and going, oh, maybe guilt isn't always applicable after eating. And the next time it will suggest guilt, but that suggestion will be a bit weaker. And you click no again. And after a couple of times, the brain's like, oh, well, looks like we're not doing guilt after eating anymore, so I'll stop suggesting it. And so when we can start to see our brains operate like computers do, like algorithms do, and that we are teaching our brains by our reactions, by our actions, then we can start to see that actually everything my brain does, it's doing it because I taught it to. And if I want to teach my brain something differently, I have to start acting and behaving differently. So if I want to teach my brain that I don't need to feel guilty after eating, I need to start acting like I'm not feeling guilty after eating. And that's really all this neural rewiring crap is about. That's really what that's about, is understanding that the brain is this big computer that's learning from everything you do all the time. It's learning from the thoughts you engage with. It's learning from the emotional reactions that you engage with. And because we were rejecting emotional reactions all the time, actually, in our lives. You know, you might go into a coffee shop and the barista's late with your coffee and you feel really angry, but you reject that emotion and you don't scream and yell at her, and you just, you know, because you reject it. We do it all the time. It's just applying it to this, and also understanding that something can feel really true in that moment. It can feel so true that I should feel guilty after eating this cake. But just because something feels true doesn't mean it is true. And as soon as you start to question that and say, actually, brain, I disagree. I don't think I should engage in this guilt emotion. The brain will start to change. It's not actually as difficult when we understand it like that. It's not as difficult as we think it is, which is one of the saddest things I think about eating disorder recovery. Is it's always sort of promoted as, oh, recovery is so difficult and some people can never do it and this, that, and the other. I'm like, you know what? It's actually not. Maintaining an eating disorder is difficult. Recovery is actually easy. It's just getting ourselves to the point when we're willing to override our fear response and do it. That's the hard part.
Yeah, I love that quote. I think with your books, like that's the main thing. Like recovery is a choice. There's so much for me to pick on this.
Is
because
your
yeah,
audience specifically binge eating?
yeah, mostly binge eating, and there might be some little tidbits of like some people who struggle with anorexia also.
Yeah.
But with binge eating recovery, like the reason with why they really struggle with recovery is the fear of weight gain.
Absolutely.
It,
Well,
it's what's keeping them into dieting. Yeah.
I was binging for a good 4 years in my recovery. So not in my recovery,
Mm,
before my recovery. So I had a
okay.
huge binge restrict cycle that I was in.
Mm,
I would binge on enormous, colossal amounts of food every night, and then not eat all day and exercise all day. So I was in a binge restrict cycle. I didn't really understand
yeah.
it was a binge restrict cycle at the time. I felt, like most people I don't actually believe that binge eating is a disorder, and I don't believe it should be called binge eating disorder, because I
Mm,
don't think binge eating is a disorder. I think that binge eating is a response to
mm,
dietary restriction. And therefore, it's not a disorder. It's actually a very appropriate response from the body to dietary restriction. And the restriction is the disorder. The restriction that precedes the binge and the restriction that follows the binge is the disorder. And I think that feels like there's this big divide apparently between people that have binge eating disorder and people who have bulimia and people who have anorexia. And I see
mm.
it all as the same problem. I
Absolutely. Yeah.
I would have been diagnosed with anorexia, but I had this huge binge restrict cycle that went on for years and years and years and years. So most of us do engage in all of the behaviors. I've also met people that have been diagnosed with binge eating disorder, that restricted far heavier than I ever did when I was
Mm,
diagnosed with anorexia. And so I just think that a lot of these diagnoses are made when the people making the diagnosis looks at a person's body type. And if you present super skinny,
mhm.
you're going to get diagnosed with anorexia. But despite the fact that I was binging on huge amounts of calories every night, I would have been diagnosed with anorexia because how I presented. Whereas if you present in a more normal looking body, you're not going to get diagnosed with anorexia, regardless of how heavily you're restricting. Um, and so I think that a lot of people think they have binge eating disorder. I'm like, no, 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 no. The binge eating is your body trying to solve the problem. And the problem is your dietary
Mm,
restriction. And then that's terrifying for people because they know then they have to stop restricting. And when we do that, when we stop restricting, there's this overlap period, which feels like it's going on forever and ever and ever, is really scary. And when I say the overlap period, that's when I started to make myself or let myself eat during the day. And I ate a ton of food during the day. And then I
mm,
also continued to eat a ton of food at night. That's the overlap period. But that
mm.
you have to go through that, and you sort of have to survive. You have to hold yourself to not restricting, because when your body is sort of like, okay, all right, well, there's restriction is not here anymore. When it feels secure, then the urge to binge is gonna gradually decline.
Absolutely. Because what I tell people is like with binge eating, the habit of binge eating, it's not a problem. It's just a symptom. If we
Exactly.
see if you see the like you like with the anorexia, when you struggle with anorexia, like it's just a symptom of your body telling you like, okay, like where's the food? And then you're trying to like fight against your body,
Yeah.
fight against your natural urge just because maybe your brain's conditioned to do that. Maybe social media is telling you to do this.
Mm-hmm.
If you struggle with binge eating, if you just go into Reddit, you just type like how to stop binge eating, you'll see people jumping onto these fasts. And like you mentioned, actually, that's really interesting that you mentioned about like anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder. They all overlap. I think if you just go to your GP or your doctor and then you just present with symptoms like, oh, I eat tons of food, I feel I have poor body image. It's a tick box. Okay,
Yeah.
you probably have binge eating disorder. When you actually deep down, you might have anorexia, even maybe atypical anorexia. Maybe just someone might be like a higher body weight. Okay, there's no way this person has anorexia. You're definitely a binge eating disorder, and it just leads to different,
Yeah.
so much confusion with
Exactly.
trusting your body.
And then when people get diagnosed with something like binge eating disorder, or then what that diagnosis does is it tends to remove their permission to eat, which makes their problem worse,
Mm.
unfortunately.
Absolutely. So, and with fear of weight gain, can you explain a little more on, because when I read your book, Fear of Weight Gain, also amazingly titled, very aptly titled book. there's this thing about you mentioned about the analogy of introducing fear foods, because same thing with anorexia, same thing with bulimia, binge eating disorder. There's always like the fear of weight gain, but the same thing about fear foods. You talk about this spider and the toilet analogy, if that's the one I can remember. Could
Yeah,
you explain a
yeah.
bit more about that?
A lot of the behaviors and a lot of the sort of OCD and a lot of the weird things that we
Mm,
over the years develop when we have a restrictive eating disorder are fear-based.
mm,
And the reason I use that, you know, we always, with people with eating disorders, we tend to become very rigid in our routines, and then we have this rigid routine, you know, we get up, we do this, and that we go through each day. And if anybody tries to disrupt that rigid routine, we usually get very agitated or angry at them. And so for that reason, most of us then start to isolate ourselves socially a little bit so that our rigid routine can't get disrupted, and that makes us feel more secure and more safe. And that's all to do with that fear of weight gain. And it's when the brain is afraid of weight gain, that's not just limited to the times of day that you eat. That's not when that fear just pops up then, because what your brain is really afraid of is energy surplus. And so what the brain
mm,
is doing all the time is it's trying to track how much energy you're intaking and how much energy you're putting out. And it's just always kind of fearful that you might go into energy surplus. And so it's a fear that's there with you the whole time in everything that you do. And I liken it to if you had arachnophobia, if you were really, really afraid of spiders.
yeah, I'm scared of
And
spiders.
yeah, right, me too. And you lived in a house that you couldn't leave, and there's spiders all over the house. So that's you can then, when you know that, you can feel that state of just being tense and being fearful and being on edge and being alert the whole time. That's what happens when we're in our sympathetic nervous system. That's the fight or flight one. And so that's why a person with an eating disorder is in their sympathetic nervous system all the time, because as far as their brain is concerned, that fear source is around them the whole time. That fear of energy surplus is around them the whole time. And if you lived in a house that had spiders in it and you just had no choice and you had to live there for years and years and years, what you would do in order to cope with that situation is you would start to notice in the things that the spiders did, and you know the rooms that had fewer spiders in, and maybe there's some rooms that's got more spiders in at certain times of day and other times of day, and you would start to become very rigid in your behavior, and you try and stick to your patterns about predicting when the spiders were going to be in the rooms and things like that, and you'd start to sort of act in that rigid and protect and defensive manner that people with eating disorders act in. And that is what the brain does when the brain is fearful, and the brain is just trying to find a way, how can I make myself feel safer in this really fearful situation? And so you would become very rigid in your behaviors and strange in your behaviors. And I just use that example so that people can understand that when you have an eating disorder, it's not just about the mealtime. We become rigid and strange in our behaviors in all aspects of our life. And that is because the brain is fearful in all aspects of our life, and that fear source is just around us and abundant the whole time. And every single thing that somebody might ask you, like, do you want to go for a drink after work, your brain immediately goes into its sympathetic nervous system, because it's like, shit, alcohol, calories, can I do that or not? Can I not do that? The brain starts to do that negotiation, and that's a fear response. And so you say, no, I'm not going to go for that drink after work, because it's just easier to say no. It's easier to stick to your routine. It's easier not to put yourself in unknown situations where you might have to deal with the threat of consuming more calories or the threat of not burning off more calories.
You mentioned that in your book, the four F's: fear, flight, freeze, and fawn. Trying to avoid those calories as much as possible.
Yeah,
Could you explain a bit more about that for
absolutely.
those who
Yeah,
to
because
just
there's,
understand fear?
I know with me, I was so weird when I had an eating disorder. There's no other way to describe it. And I knew I
Weird,
was
yeah.
weird, but I also couldn't stop being weird. And I think that just makes us think that we're just these weird, strange people, when we can understand that, no, you're not actually weird. The reason that you are behaving in this manner is because you're fearful. And so I use this sort of, like you said, fight, flight. Those are the most commonly known sympathetic
Yeah.
nervous system reactions. But there's also freeze and fawn, and freeze and fawn are super common with people with eating disorders. In fact, fight and flight are less common when we become adults with eating disorders. So when you're a teenager or a child with an eating disorder, fight or flight is used more often because you're at home and your parents are pressuring you to eat. And so you fight with them or you run away. So we do fight or flight. Like, those are kind of obvious. When we move out, we become adults, we have our own space. There's nobody there pressuring us to eat as much. So fight or flight become actually less relevant, but they're still there, you know, a flight especially, and that usually shows itself in the example that I used before. Do you want to go out for a drink after work? No, I've got to get home. That's running away. That's running away from something you're afraid of, right? That's you leaving. That's you saying, I'm not going to do this thing. That's flight. Fight becomes much less relevant when we are adults. And the two that become, I think, most common are freeze and fawn. So freeze is that experience that a person with an eating disorder feels when they walk into a supermarket and they are determined they're going to buy something. And they might even have in their head, I'm going to go crazy. I'm going to buy myself that chocolate I've been thinking about all week. And then they walk in there and they freeze and they come out having bought nothing. Really common with people with eating disorders. And so a freeze response is a fear response. And what the brain's doing there is the brain is going, I'm afraid of the action that you're about to take. So therefore, I'm going to render you useless so that you can't take that action. That's what the freeze response is. It's a fear response. It's the brain trying to stop us doing what it's afraid of. It works brilliantly with eating disorders. I know that every time I went shopping and I, have in my head when I was walking to the store, all these things I was going to buy. And then I get into the store and I would buy nothing. And I would walk out with nothing. I'd just be unable to do anything. That's a freeze response. And then the fawn response is what we do when we don't want other people to know that we are afraid. And so I did the fawn response a lot. That's when you're trying to look normal. You're just trying to look like everybody else, but you're not like everybody else. And so if I was at a sort of party or something and people were passing around crisps, I wouldn't want to look weird if everybody's taking a handful of crisps. I didn't want to look like the only one that didn't take a handful of crisps, especially because I thought I was always paranoid that people would think I would have an eating disorder, which is ironic. So I did. But, I didn't want anyone to think, oh, the skinny girl's not eating. Yeah, she has an eating disorder. So a fawn response is when we act like everybody else, but our fear causes us to be pretending. And so that response, I would take a handful of crisps and I would actually pretend to eat them. I'd put them to my mouth and then sort of hide them in my hand. And then I'd cross my arms and I'd be crunching those crisps up on my hand. And then I'd sit on a chair and sort of deposit them down the back of the chair or something like that. That's a fawn response. And I would do things like that. And I'd be doing it thinking, oh my God, I'm so weird. What is wrong with me? Because I didn't know what was wrong with me. I just knew I was trying to look like everybody else, but I just couldn't eat those crisps. And so what do you do with them? You hide them somewhere. And yes, now I know that that's a very typical fawn response. You just try and act like you're going along with everything, but then you don't.
When you were doing the fawn response, I can only imagine how many beats per second your heart must be going through.
Yeah.
Hoping no one will catch you out. Oh, what do you have? Why are you crunching the crisps?
Tell you what, I became very good at it, Jonathan.
Have you? Okay.
I became so good at hiding food.
Did anyone see you actually do it, Tabitha?
I'm sure that people did. I'm sure that they did, and I'm sure that people, sort of university friends, and thought, she's so damn weird. Why is she doing this weird stuff? But no one said anything to me, because that's not polite. People don't say stuff. And I think that that's another one of the issues, because people are polite and they don't say, why are you being so weird? We sort of convince ourselves, nobody noticed that I was being weird. This is just totally normal. And we sort of are then able to brush over our own weirdness. And sometimes I think that's not helpful. Sometimes I think it's helpful when someone says to us, that's weird behavior that you're doing right there, just to help me remember that, this isn't normal. Something I have to figure out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All right. So just to wrap it up, I could talk to you about or listen to you for hours. You're such a fount of wisdom. just to wrap it up, this podcast, I just want to ask you, for those who are listening, what does your life look like now that you're recovered from anorexia? How different is it compared to, if I, pardon my language, might say, living a weird life? What's it like right
Oh,
now?
wildly different. I've always, since I was 7 years old, I've ridden horses and I've always been obsessed with horses. And
Hmm.
all through my childhood and my teens until I got an eating disorder, my life revolved around horses. And when
Mm.
I developed my eating disorder, I stopped riding horses. I lost interest. And because I saw riding horses as a waste of time because you're just kind of sitting there, really. That's how I thought it, whereas I could be out running, which burns more calories. So
Mm.
I actually stopped. I stopped a lot of things, my social life being a huge one of them, but also, my horses and my animals. And since I've recovered, my life has sort of done a complete U-turn and gone back to, so now it completely revolves around horses. And I have a breeding stud in Colorado, and that's
Mm.
pretty much what I do with my day, is obsess about horses, think about horses, ride horses, breed horses. It's everything to do with horses. But
Mm.
the other thing that is drastically and massively different about my life is my social life. I always, when I had an eating disorder, I sort of convinced myself that I was antisocial and that I was fine on my own and I didn't really like people or I didn't really need friends. And since I recovered, I realized that that wasn't at all true. And I'm thankful to say I have some really, really wonderful friends. And it's one of the parts of my life that I enjoy the most, actually, my friends.
Ah, that's amazing. It's crazy how like just having an eating disorder makes you realize the things you love the most, you just push it to the side,
Yeah.
and just having everything back, like you'll have so much more mental energy, so much more space, and actually enjoy the things without feeling stressed, without being in the sympathetic response most of
Yes.
your life,
Yeah.
living your life in the sympathetic response. I can't imagine what life must be like that.
It's really fascinating to me how the brain prioritizes very different things when it has an eating
Mm.
disorder. And my brain didn't see any value in social relationships. It didn't really see it as
Mm.
productive time spent. And I was obsessed with being productive all the time.
Mm.
Um, and my brain's totally changed in that respect. I could have, so much to do at work. I could have all these things I wanted to do, but my friends will absolutely come first, regardless. And that was very
Mm.
untrue when I had an eating disorder. Like I think I've said in one of my books, I didn't go to my best friend's wedding because I wanted to go to an exercise class instead. So that shows you where my
Mm.
priorities were when I had an eating disorder. And now my brain hugely prioritizes my friends and social relationships above absolutely anything else.
Would your did, when you struggle with an eating disorder, did you find it difficult? Did your friends find it difficult? Like, did they think you were just trying to push them away? Did they take
Oh,
anything
absolutely.
personally?
You know, mm, some did for sure. Some did for sure.
Mm.
I developed my eating disorder when I was about 17. So I had sort of childhood friends. I was quite a social person. I had a lot of friends.
Mm.
I'd say quite a lot of them just sort of slipped away. They probably thought, what the hell's going on with her? She's really weird. And I don't want anything to do with
Mm.
that. And I had some that tried to stick with me that I pushed them away because I didn't want them trying to tell me that I had an eating disorder or try to look after me or try. So I really pushed them out of the way. But those people really did try and stick with me, despite the fact that I was absolutely kind of just, like I said, I wasn't prioritizing my friends. So I did not behave very well towards them. But since I've recovered, I've sort of got back into relationships with those people. And they've understood why I was like that at that time. Um,
Mm.
I think I also don't, the people that sort of wash their hands of me, I absolutely don't blame them for that either. I think I might have done the same, honestly, because I didn't treat my friends very well.
Mm.
So I'm more surprised by the ones that didn't wash their hands of me. I'm like, why did you even bother with me? I was just awful.
Bro, I think they saw you more than just your eating disorder.
I think that's what they'd
Yeah.
say, but I still think that that takes a very special person.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so Tabitha, where can people find you if they want to work with you, or is there anything you want to share to the world?
I've got a website, tabithafarrar.com. I've got a YouTube channel, which I update sometimes. There's a lot of videos on there. I don't make as many these days. There's a lot of content on my website. It's just all free content. I don't continue to write blogs now, but I did go through years where I wrote hundreds of blogs. And so all of that information's on my website. And I've got books out there as well. But I think that if you can be bothered to sort of troll through my website, all of the information that's in the books is on my website, but it's just not in a particularly organized fashion. So the books just sort of take that information and put it in a much more organized and easy to read and linear fashion. But you don't have to buy the books. It is all on my website and in my YouTube channels. It's just you'd need to sort of scroll through all of that to get it.
Well, personally, I would recommend getting the books because everything's all lined out. It's all linear. So that's my opinion. Get Tabitha's books and go through all of her social media, and I'm sure you'd be amazing to work to. You're very comforting to speak to. You're very relatable. I'm sure it's just such a nice, relaxing conversation. It's probably like in the UK right now, close to 8 o'clock. And I just feel very relaxed having a cup of tea, as if, I don't feel stressed if I'm talking to you. Because aside from like helping people struggling with binge eating, I also work as a eating disorders dietitian. So I do talk to people
brilliant.
in an acute setting in hospital with people struggling with anorexia. And it can be very difficult to relay information that, okay, we're going to talk about meal plan, we're going to talk about tube feeding. And after like hearing this, it just came back into my head. Actually, there's nothing stopping me from just recommending your book, Fear of Weight Gain, because having more, like you said, you just have to wave the white flag. You just have to listen to your body. And when I ask people who are struggling with their weight, people who have anorexia, and then we need to like refeed them to a certain BMI, I ask them, how do you feel about tube feeding? And they say it's a massive setback. I want to try doing this on my own. I want to weight restore on my own as much as possible. And most of the time they really struggle with the idea, thinking that, okay, I need to do this on my own, and having a tube feed will just set me back. Like there's no point of trying to recover if I'm going to be tube fed. What advice, this final advice, what final advice would you say to those people, or give me advice so I can
so I'd say that the more nutritionally depleted you are, the less reasonable and rational your brain is, and unfortunately the stronger your fear response is. We're going to be operating more in our sympathetic nervous system when our body is depleted. So if you are offered a tube, take it, because what that's going to help you do is it's just going to take the pressure off you trying to fight your brain. It's going to get some nutrition into your body, which means that your brain's going to get the nutrition it needs to be able to start operating in a less fearful way. You're going to move quicker into your parasympathetic nervous system. That nutrition is going to help you move out of your sympathetic nervous system, which means that it's just like giving you a little bit of a leg up. It's just giving you a little bit of a head start so that the first little bit is not going to be quite as hard. And why make anything more difficult than it needs to be? If someone's offering you something that's just going to help you move along the path of recovery, I take it. Anything that's just going to help us move along, get our body into a state of better nutrition, is going to help our brains then be able to do what we need to do in order to override that fear response. And there's no shame in that. In fact, I just think, you know what? The end goal is to get yourself to be a happy and functioning human being. And the quicker that you can get there, the better. Don't hang around with it. No one at the end of your life, there's no awards ceremony because you did everything the hard way. So because of that, don't do everything the hard way, and take some help where it's given, because the longer that you can be recovered, the longer you're going to have a happy life. To get there as soon as possible.
Absolutely. And spend more time with your horses, if you have any horses.
More time with your horses, exactly.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much, Tabitha, for coming along to the podcast. And I'm going to be linking everything in the description of the podcast and YouTube and wherever you find this this amazing discussion. So
Yeah,
yeah, and
really lovely
one,
to talk to you, and thank you for
yeah,
the work that you do as well.
uh, thank you very much. If there's one question you can ask the next guest, what would it be? It can be literally anything from something extremely deep or what's your favorite cookie?
I'm going to say, what's your favorite animal and why?
What if what if their answer is not horses? Would you
If
be
their answer's
disappointed?
not horses, I have no problem with that, but I'm always suspicious of people that don't like animals.
Oh, okay. If someone's, I wouldn't be suspicious. I would think like, okay, there's something wrong with you if you don't like animals.
Right.
You have to like at
But
least one animal.
exactly. I don't
Yeah.
even care if it's a snake or something like that, which I don't like snakes at all. But
Oh, yeah.
I think that people should be able to enjoy animals.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Tabitha, for coming along to the podcast.
Real pleasure to talk to you.